You know it is going to be a bad day when the first thing you see at work is a mountain of volcanic landscaping rocks choking the warehouse loading dock. Not just one truck either. 8 flatbeds, all lined up like some bizarre parade of chaos. Each one unloading pallet after pallet of black-red lava rock. It looked like mortar had spilled into our logistics bay. And to make it worse, this was the very morning our highest-profile client, Corvault Systems, was scheduled to tour the facility. They were expecting to see a flawless, sterile supply chain for their $22 million cleanroom equipment contract. What they got instead was a gravel explosion that turned our operations floor into a garden center gone rogue. And I already knew exactly who had signed off on the mess. His name was Nathan, and this was the beginning of his end. My name is Dana Prescott. I am 37 years old, born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, and currently the Senior Director of Procurement and Fulfillment at Arcovector Logistics in Chicago. I do not come from money, and I am definitely not the kind of person who gets their job handed to them at a family brunch. I earned every inch of my career the hard way, working double shifts, mastering every piece of enterprise logistics software before it was trendy, and carrying the weight of this company's biggest deals on my back while others posed for press photos. I was not perfect, but I was precise. That precision is what got me the Corvault contract. $22 million of revenue tied to a multi-year deal, all dependent on our ability to deliver cleanroom-grade materials with zero contamination. And somehow, lava rocks happened. When the truck started unloading, Eli from Warehouse Ops radioed me twice. "Dana, you seeing this? Are we expecting lava substrate?" he asked, half laughing, half concerned. I did not even have to check the shipping manifest. I already had a feeling in my stomach that something was about to come full circle. I had known for weeks that Nathan Wells, my brand new co-lead strategist, handpicked by our CEO, was going to crash and burn. I just never imagined it would be this loud or this public. And I certainly never thought it would involve decorative garden gravel. But here we were. Nathan had only been with us for 5 weeks. 5 long, infuriating, insultingly performative weeks. He was 26, fresh out of some overpriced consulting job, and Marlene, our CEO, introduced him as her brilliant nephew with a bold vision. Vision, sure. If vision meant ignoring procurement protocols, mocking inventory audits, and calling me his training buddy during a toast after I closed the Corvault deal. I remember standing there with a glass of flat champagne, smiling through gritted teeth, while he joked about how old school my spreadsheets were and how he preferred to feel the flow. He was all swagger, no substance. But worse than that, he was protected. Still, I was not stupid. I knew better than to confront power with emotion. So I waited. I documented. I gave him enough rope to hang himself, with carbon-neutral packaging and digital signatures, of course. I watched him wave off vendor verification emails and skip over flagged line items in shared docs. I stopped correcting him. If he thought he could run the show, I was happy to let him try. And now here it was, the fallout in the form of 760 pallets of rock that no biosafety lab would ever accept. By the time I got down to the loading dock, Eli had pulled the team off the line. The dust alone posed a hazard. You could see it coating the automated sorting rails. It was fine, black, and stuck to everything like powdered ash. One of the dock managers had already torn open a packing slip. "Shipped from Red Peak Landscaping Solutions," it read. I nodded slowly and said, "Get someone to film this." Not out of pettiness. Okay, maybe a little, but because I knew what was coming. Our reputation was on the line, and someone was going to look for a scapegoat. I stood there, watching the inspection SUV roll in from Corvault's headquarters, headlights slicing through the dust cloud, and I took a deep breath. This was not sabotage. It was strategy. Sometimes the best way to deal with a parasite is not to pull it out, but to let it eat itself from the inside. Nathan had wanted control. Now he was going to see what responsibility really looked like. And I had my files, my receipts, and a front row seat. The lava was just the beginning. 3 weeks before the lava rock fiasco, I had done what most people in my department had never even come close to doing. I secured the biggest contract in Arcovector's history, $22 million. That is not just a win, it is a headline. CoreVault Systems, one of the most meticulous, high-stakes biosafety lab manufacturers in the country, had chosen us to be their supplier for the next 4 years. The process took 6 months of nonstop planning, vetting vendors, triple confirming compliance standards, and personally presenting to a boardroom full of clinical engineers. I put everything I had into closing that deal. I expected a meeting, maybe a formal email from the CEO, or at the very least, a bonus check with more than 2 zeros. What I got was a cupcake. No, seriously, a vanilla cupcake with blue sprinkles delivered by HR in a plastic container. That was my reward, and then, at the so-called celebration gathering, a hastily thrown-together mix of store-bought snacks and warm soda, I was blindsided. Right in the middle of Marlene's lukewarm congratulations, she clapped her hands and said, "We also have exciting news. Nathan Wells is joining Dana as our new co-lead strategist." People clapped because they were told to. I just stood there, smiling with my lips and not my eyes. Then, as if the insult needed a cherry on top, Nathan raised a paper cup of sparkling cider and said, "To my new training buddy." I almost choked on mine. Nathan Wells, 26 years old, perfectly styled hair, a resume built more on internships than results, and exactly zero experience in logistics or procurement. But he was Marlene's nephew, and apparently that was all the experience he needed. He had this grin like he knew the joke and I was the punchline. Everyone else in the room went along with it, some out of fear, others out of confusion. I caught Trina's eye across the room. She gave me a look that said, "Are they serious?" I nodded, sipping my drink to keep from saying anything I would regret. After the awkward clapping faded and people went back to pretending to enjoy carrot sticks, Nathan made his way over to me and said, "I am so excited to learn from you. Procurement is kind of my vibe, you know?" I do not know what that meant, and I do not think he did either. I responded with a polite, "Welcome aboard," and made a mental note to update my disaster contingency plan. I knew exactly what this was, a show, a performance. They wanted the face of the CoreVault deal, me, to stay visible just long enough to carry the credit, while they quietly slipped in someone they could mold, someone they could control, someone like Nathan. I spent the rest of that evening making small talk with people who clearly felt sorry for me. One manager even whispered, "I am so sorry, Dana," before slipping away to refill her drink. The party was over by 8. By 9, I was at home with my laptop reviewing the CoreVault compliance checklist and tightening up the fulfillment timeline. Because while Nathan was out celebrating his new title, I was still doing the job. I had no illusions about what came next. He would start shadowing me, slowly stepping into meetings, tossing out buzzwords, and getting credit for work he could not even spell. And if I pushed back too hard, I would be labeled difficult. Or worse, not a team player. But here's the thing. I do not forget. I do not forget being dismissed, being mocked, or being treated like a stepping stone by someone who never even earned his shoes. I do not blow up. I do not scream. I collect. I document. I watch. And when the moment comes, I act. That night, sitting on my couch, staring at that dumb cupcake, I made a quiet promise to myself. If Nathan wanted to learn from me, then fine. I would teach him exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman, and it would not end with frosting. Nathan showed up the next morning like he was walking into a music festival, not a multi-million-dollar logistics firm. He had a cold brew in one hand, a skateboard tucked under the other arm, and this big, dumb grin like he had already won something. He strolled past our operations coordinator without even saying hello, leaned against the reception desk, and said, "Hey, where's my desk vibe?" Like we were supposed to set the tone for his brand. I was sitting in the conference room reviewing fulfillment specs for the CoreVault shipment when I heard him call me Coach Prescott. He winked as he said it. I looked up and forced a smile, the kind that says, "You have 30 seconds to grow up or get out." He sat in on our 10 a.m. vendor call and spent most of it scrolling on his phone, nodding like he understood a word we were saying. I had spent 2 days preparing the spec comparisons for thermal-grade packaging and shipment frequency. Nathan, meanwhile, chimed in only once to say, "Can we make the boxes look less sterile?" I blinked. It was a biosafety lab shipment. The whole point was sterile. I glanced at Marlene on the call, waiting for her to step in. She just laughed and said, "He brings such fresh energy." After the meeting, Nathan casually announced he had rescheduled Thursday's key supplier briefing to 7 p.m. He did not ask, he just moved it. I found out when the calendar alert popped up. When I asked him why, he shrugged and said, "Evening hours feel more inspired. Daytime's kind of brain fog territory for me." That was the moment I opened a new folder on my desktop called Nathan Logs. I do not overreact. I record. I started saving every email, every Slack message, every changed meeting invite. I copied Marlene on everything. I made sure there were timestamps, confirmation receipts, and polite but direct questions that he either ignored or answered with emojis. One of his favorite responses was, or nah, to anything involving vendor vetting. He rejected a QA form once because the color palette looked anxious. That was his word, anxious. I asked him if he meant the content or the design. He said, "Mostly the energy." I stared at my screen for 10 full seconds before replying with, "Thanks for the feedback." Over the next week, he missed 2 out of 3 daily check-ins, claimed he did his best thinking on the roof, and pitched the idea of free-form procurement in a team meeting. I am not even sure what that means, but Marlene smiled and said it sounded adaptive. When I pulled up the supplier matrix to correct one of his entries, he had tripled the quantity of medical-grade gloves. We discovered he had filled in half the sheet, using AI-generated vendor names from some online tool. One of them was Grip Gloves Unlimited, not real, not verified. He said, "Well, it could be real. Let's not limit ourselves." There is a difference between creativity and carelessness. What Nathan did was not new thinking. It was negligence dressed in a hoodie. And I realized very quickly that trying to correct him in real time would not work. Marlene had already made her decision. This was not about skill. This was about spotlight. And Nathan knew how to perform. He cracked jokes during policy walkthroughs, showed up late with pastries, and talked about how procurement needed more intuition. Meanwhile, I was still the one making sure our compliance dashboard stayed green and our clients got what they paid for. So I adjusted, I stopped arguing, I stopped pointing out mistakes in meetings. I let him lead vendor calls and say whatever he wanted. I muted my mic and wrote down everything. When he approved a batch of unlabeled thermal gel packs, I logged the timestamp. When he claimed to just sense that a shipment was fine and skipped the inspection process, I clipped the recording. And every time Marlene waved away my concern with phrases like, "That is just youthful agility," or "Let us not stifle innovation," I nodded politely and added another bullet to the file. Nathan wanted to lead with vibes. Fine. But eventually the numbers always catch up. By week 2, my job had become equal parts logistics manager and cleanup crew for Nathan's growing list of mistakes. He was still coasting on charm, while I was the one fixing every misstep before it snowballed. But some errors, especially the ones buried in data, have a way of creeping past even the most careful eyes, especially when someone refuses to read anything that does not come with emojis. I was still up late most nights cross-checking supplier SKUs, double confirming our compliance tags, and correcting numbers Nathan casually felt right about. He kept saying things like, "Spreadsheets are outdated energy," and "procurement is a gut sport." It took everything I had not to laugh in his face. One Tuesday, after a full day of reshuffling a vendor schedule he had completely derailed, Nathan swaggered into my office with a half-finished smoothie and said, "I was vibing last night and redid the whole bulk order form. Clean lines, less stress, you'll love it." I blinked. The bulk order form, the one we were finalizing for our quarterly procurement cycle with over 17 verified vendors. It was a tight operation that ran on millimeter precision. I had already flagged 3 unusual line items that needed verification, one of which stood out immediately. Decorative lava substrate, garden use only. I highlighted it in yellow, then again in red. Then I left a note in the margin with bold underlined text, "Non-compliant, not for industrial or cleanroom use." Nathan opened the doc exactly 0 times. I asked him during our afternoon check-in if he had reviewed the flagged items. He smiled and said, "Oh, I skimmed it. Looks clean, good energy." I pressed again, reminding him that decorative materials do not meet Corvalt's particulate standards and could contaminate the entire cleanroom shipment. He tilted his head and said, "I mean, rocks are rocks, right?" I stared at him for a full 5 seconds, hoping he was joking. He was not. That night, I forwarded the doc to Marlene, CC'd Nathan, and included a side note explaining the risk. Her reply came 5 hours later. "Let's not slow momentum. Trust Nathan's instincts. He's learning fast." I read that line 3 times. Trust his instincts, on a contract worth $22 million. The truth was, I had done all I could. I had warned him, documented it, highlighted it, and sent it up the chain. But they did not want my expertise. They wanted my silence. They wanted me to keep the ship sailing quietly while Nathan pretended to captain it. So I stopped pushing. I stopped fighting. I made sure every interaction had a digital footprint. I printed hard copies of emails, saved version histories of documents, and backed up everything in a cloud folder they could not touch. I was not going to be the one they threw under the bus when the gravel hit the fan. The following morning, Nathan sent out the final bulk order without a second review. I watched it go out and said nothing. The lava substrate was still in there, buried between thermal gel packs and reinforced stainless racks. He never caught it, never questioned it, never asked why a cleanroom facility would need 760 pallets of decorative garden gravel. He was too busy drafting a slide deck called Procurement But Make It Sexy. I am not joking, that was the title. He presented it to Marlene later that day while I sat in the back, biting my tongue and quietly saving a copy of his final approval email. Time-stamped, signed, forwarded. That afternoon, he strutted into the warehouse with his phone camera on, filming a mock day-in-the-life segment for social media. He winked at the forklift operator, high-fived the warehouse techs, and then asked me, "Are we crushing it, or what?" I nodded and said, "Oh, we are definitely going to make an impact." He smiled, completely missing the weight behind my words. I walked back to my desk, pulled up the gravel invoice, and added one final note to the Nathan logs. Approved without review, flag ignored, confirmation sent at 3:47 p.m. And just like that, the lava was officially on the ledger. By the 5th week, Nathan had fully transformed into a walking podcast episode. He strutted into meetings armed with phrases like procurement elasticity and agile synergy, tossing them around like confetti. He used vertical alignment to describe a lunch order once. People nodded because they had stopped listening. Marlene, on the other hand, looked at him like he was some disruptive genius. Every time I raised a concern, she would give me this sideways glance, eyebrows slightly lifted, a tight smile that said, "Play nice, Eliza." And I did, at least on the surface. I realized that correcting him was not just pointless, it was counterproductive. He doubled down on the nonsense the moment anyone challenged him, so I pivoted. I stopped fighting him in meetings. I stopped flagging his errors in real time. Instead, I started holding up a mirror. When he skipped over the sterilization protocols for the Corvault shipment, I asked him, politely and on record, if he wanted to adjust the order based on his instinct metrics. He grinned like it was a compliment and said, "Exactly." I copied the response to the log, time-stamped, archived. Our fulfillment timeline, meanwhile, was slowly unraveling. Orders were going out late. Suppliers were confused about the specs. Nathan changed a vendor's shipment window by 5 days and forgot to tell anyone. When the warehouse team flagged it, he told them the system was too rigid and needed to trust the rhythm. That was an actual sentence he said to a logistics coordinator. I kept the Slack screenshot. Every misstep echoed louder now, not because I was pointing at it, but because I was letting it speak for itself. He presented a quarter-end update to Marlene with a slide that literally said, "Forecast, Pierce gut feels." She clapped. I nodded. Then I quietly forwarded the real forecast, complete with delays, overages, and back orders, to our fulfillment lead, who thanked me privately and said, "Good to know someone's still doing the math." I smiled and said, "Just helping the vibes align." It became a running joke in my head. When Nathan suggested replacing vendor audits with vibe checks, I simply asked what metrics we would use to define that. He blinked and said, "You know, general energy." I nodded and wrote it down. By now, the warehouse staff had picked up on the dysfunction. I walked in one morning to find one of the crew marking boxes with emojis instead of standard tags. When I asked about it, he said, "Just matching the synergy." It was sarcasm, but sharp. People were getting tired, but they were also watching. That mattered. Because when the wheels eventually came off, and they would, I needed those witnesses, not just to tell the story, but to confirm the pattern. This was not one mistake. It was a philosophy built on arrogance and buzzwords. All I had to do was let the results catch up. I started printing emails again, keeping receipts, logging every gut-approved decision in a shared folder that had quiet read access from upper ops. No commentary, just facts. I even started using Nathan's own language in reports. If he described a process as free-form agile, I used that exact phrase in my summaries. When something went sideways, no one could say I was editorializing. I was simply quoting the source. When he dropped the ball on the cold chain packaging specs and tried to blame the supplier, I pulled up his message where he said, "Let's ditch the manual. Let the goods breathe." Marlene said nothing. She just looked away. That was the moment I knew the tide was turning. People were beginning to feel it. The charm was wearing thin. The chaos was stacking up. But instead of yelling louder, I stayed quiet and kept the lights on everything. Nathan wanted to play the visionary. Fine. I made sure every vision was reflected back to him in crystal clear definition. And slowly, his own shadows started catching up. The quarterly bulk order was our biggest logistics project of the season, and Nathan insisted on taking the wheel. His words, not mine. "I got this one, Eliza. Let me show you what intuitive procurement looks like." I smiled and said, "Sounds good." I had already done the groundwork, of course. The template was ready, the suppliers vetted, the SKUs triple-checked. But this time, I made a small adjustment. A single-line item nestled between sterilized containment carts and reinforced shelving. Substrate, mineralized, heat-treated. It sounded technical, harmless, and precisely vague. In reality, it was the same decorative lava rock flagged in the last order. Clearly marked, but wrapped in corporate language. Nathan never noticed. I watched as he opened the spreadsheet, scrolled halfway through, gave a satisfied nod, and said, "Looks clean to me." Then he added his usual flair and fired off the confirmation email to all vendors, CCing Marlene for transparency. The subject line read, "Q4 Inventory Lock Greenlight." It was almost poetic. I tagged the email, saved a copy to the project folder, and highlighted the item in the approval log. It was done. All I had to do now was wait. The trucks were already being loaded. The next day, Eli from operations pinged me on Slack. "Hey Eliza, you sure about this item here?" He had circled the substrate line and attached a packing photo from one of the pallets. Bright red-black gravel, sealed and shrink-wrapped, just like you would find at a garden center. I replied with a single screenshot, Nathan's approval email, and a tiny wink emoji. Eli sent back a laughing face and said, "Say no more." Warehouse ops had been watching this train wreck roll toward the station for weeks. Now they had the paperwork to match. I did not have to say a word to Marlene. She had been looped on every step. Her golden hire had taken full control of the order, ignored all documentation, skipped every cross-check, and rubber-stamped a non-compliant product into a multi-million-dollar biosafety contract. Everything was time-stamped, with his name on it. I had even gently mentioned the item earlier in the week, just to keep myself covered. "Did you want to review that substrate line?" I had asked in a meeting. Nathan waved his hand and said, "Nope, clean energy all the way." Marlene smiled and nodded. There was a strange sense of calm in those next few days, the kind you feel right before a storm hits. Nathan was walking around the office like he had just cracked a Fortune 500 algorithm. He gave a team talk in the break room titled Fast Forward Fulfillment, where he explained that corporate drag was the enemy of innovation. Meanwhile, I was on the back end, organizing the shipment data and preparing the delivery manifest. I made sure every box, every tracking code, and every supplier log pointed back to the same approval trail, Nathan's trail. The shipment was scheduled to arrive on Monday morning. 7 flatbed trucks loaded with precision lab equipment, sterile packaging, and, of course, 760 pallets of mineralized lava rock. The client's inspection team was due to arrive within the same hour for a walkthrough. I had already arranged for Eli to be there when the gravel was unloaded. He promised to snap a few photos for documentation. Nothing dramatic, just evidence, just truth. By Friday afternoon, the final confirmations had gone out. Nathan celebrated with an Instagram story, a boomerang of him clinking iced coffees with the caption, "Orders locked, vision aligned." I watched from across the office, sipping my tea. Marlene passed by my desk and said, "Thanks for supporting Nathan through this. You are a real team player." I smiled and said, "Just following the lead." That night, I stayed late in the office, backing up all the communications and approval records to a private drive. I was not nervous. I was not even angry anymore. What I felt was clarity, the kind that comes from knowing you played by the rules, even when no one else did. And when the gravel hit the loading dock Monday morning, it would not be my name on the paperwork. It would be Nathan's, with Marlene's signature just a few lines below. The morning of the Corvault inspection, the warehouse buzzed with a mix of anxiety and forced optimism. Marlene arrived at 8 wide on the dot, heels clacking across the polished floor like she was walking a runway instead of a logistics facility. She swept past the front desk with a smug smile and chirped, "Let us roll out the red carpet for our partners today." I stayed silent, resisting the urge to correct her. The red was coming, but it would not be velvet. Out on the dock, the first of 7 flatbeds began to back in. The crew had been briefed, but nothing could really prepare you for the sight of 760 pallets of heat-treated decorative lava rock being unloaded in front of a biosafety cleanroom client. The second the pallets were cracked open, clouds of dark, granular dust blew straight into the open bay. It was like a slow-motion disaster. The soot drifted up and over the bay doors, coating everything in a layer of gritty black film. Within minutes, the once sterile loading area looked like the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. Eli, standing near the forklifts, radioed in through the intercom. His voice was sharp, slightly panicked. "Eliza, we got a situation down here. This stuff is not on spec. It is decorative substrate. There is dust blowing into everything. I think someone is going to lose it." I already knew who someone was going to be. I opened my inbox and pulled up the original approval email, Nathan's masterpiece. With one click, I forwarded it to Eli, adding no commentary, just a subject line. "Per your request." I turned to glance at the main entrance just as Marlene reappeared, guiding the Corvault reps through the side hallway. They were all wearing suits and cleanroom boot covers, walking with the precise posture of engineers on a tour they expected to be impressive. She had no idea. The moment they stepped into view of the loading dock, the lead inspector stopped in his tracks. His gaze landed on the mountain of lava rock and then on the swirling, sooty air. One of his associates raised a hand to shield her face. Nobody spoke. "What is this?" the inspector asked finally, looking directly at Marlene. She blinked and turned toward the open bay doors, just as another gust of wind kicked up a fresh blast of volcanic dust. It covered her white blazer instantly. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Marlene's eyes darted toward me. I gave a polite shrug and nodded toward Nathan, who had just arrived with 2 coffees in hand, completely unaware of the storm he was walking into. Nathan approached the group, clueless as ever, and smiled at the inspector like he was greeting a podcast fan. "Welcome to the Fulfillment Nerve Center. You are just in time to see, He trailed off as he looked at the gravel, then at the inspectors, then back at the dust now sticking to his gelled hair. The silence was suffocating. The Corvault team turned to leave without saying a word. Marlene jogged after them, trying to explain that there had been a vendor miscommunication, but her voice was drowned out by the beep of forklifts and the chatter of employees filming the scene on their phones. Someone whispered, "Is that landscaping gravel?" And someone else answered, "Straight from the garden section." I returned to my desk without saying much. I knew this was not over, it was just beginning, but the beauty of it was that I did not have to raise my voice or point fingers. All the evidence was digital. The approval trail was clean. Nathan had signed off. Marlene had been looped, and now the whole warehouse knew it. The red rocks were not just a product mistake, they were a perfect metaphor for the mess they had made and the reckoning rolling in right behind it. By the time the core vault team stepped back into the main corridor, the inspection was dead in the water. The chief inspector, Dr. Alan Weathers, brushed soot from his white coveralls with a grimace. His shoe had sunk half an inch into the lava dust coating our loading dock, and now the black-red grime was smudged all over his uniform. He paused at the edge of the glass hallway and turned slowly toward Marlene, who was sweating through her silk blazer. Her carefully rehearsed charm fell flat the moment his eyebrows arched. "Ms. Ellison," he said, voice low and sharp, "do you typically store landscaping material at the entry point of a BSL-3 cleanroom supply chain?" Marlene stuttered. It is a temporary shipping mistake. The vendor, there was an internal rerouting." Before she could invent the rest of the sentence, Nathan stepped forward, cheeks flushed. His voice cracked with panic. "The system approved it. We had a mislabeling. Eliza was supposed to train me on the old codes. She should have caught it." I watched as every eye in the corridor snapped toward me. Trina, standing next to the whiteboard with a dry erase marker in hand, actually snorted. I did not flinch. I walked to the side panel, tapped open my tablet, and calmly connected it to the wall projector. The screen lit up with a time-stamped procurement log. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "Nathan approved the final invoice line by line. That included item number 3361B, substrate, mineralized, heat-treated, which links directly to the lava shipment. Here is his confirmation, and here," I clicked again, "is the Slack thread where he asked if substrate was important, and Marlene replied, quote, 'Haha, sounds earthy, go with your gut.'" The room was silent. Even the hum of the HVAC system seemed to pause. I turned slowly toward Nathan and Marlene, both now frozen like mannequins under fluorescent lights. "You wanted to lead," I said softly. "You wanted instinct over intel. You wanted vibes." I gestured toward the mess still visible through the glass hallway. "This is volcanic." Marlene looked like she had swallowed a cactus. Nathan, on the other hand, shifted gears. "This is sabotage. You did this on purpose. You wanted me to fail." I tilted my head. "I wanted you to lead," I said again, more pointedly this time. "I wanted you to own your role. That means vetting SKUs, reading spreadsheets, asking questions." I swiped the screen again and pulled up the version history of the bulk order doc. "You made 3 changes, all of which ignored my comments. I flagged the substrate item 3 times. You never responded." Dr. Weathers crossed his arms. "And this was the co-lead strategist?" he asked Marlene without even turning toward Nathan. "This is the kind of oversight Core Vault can expect moving forward?" Marlene's mouth opened, then closed. Her face had gone completely pale. The tension in the room cracked like glass under pressure. Eli peeked in from the hallway, nodded toward me subtly, and mouthed the word, "nailed." The fallout did not happen in that room. It started there, but the real impact came in the hours that followed. Photos of the lava dust spread through internal channels. An anonymous tip sent a side-by-side image of the decorative gravel and our loading bay to 3 members of the board. The procurement log I had projected, it got circulated. By lunch, someone from finance forwarded me a screenshot from the CEO himself with just 3 words, "What is this?" But in that moment, standing in front of the mess they created, I felt no joy, no gloating, just clarity. They had not listened, they had not learned, and now they had no one left to blame. Their vibes had spoken, and the eruption? That was all them. By mid-morning the next day, the office was buzzing like a hive after a rock got thrown at it. Legal was pulled into a conference room so fast they left their coffees still spinning in the microwave. HR scheduled back-to-back emergency reviews under the subject line Q3 Procurement Anomaly, which was the most delicate way they could say, "How did lava get into our cleanroom facility?" I was copied on everything, not because they suspected me, but because at that point, I was the only one with a paper trail that did not scream negligence or arrogance, or both. Nathan showed up in jeans and a wrinkled button-down, like he had rolled straight out of a panic nap. He had this faux calm tone, one I had heard too many times before. In the closed-door review with HR, he went on about intent versus impact, as though that would magically erase 760 pallets of heat-treated garden rock. He blamed system gaps. He blamed miscommunication. Then he tried to say, Dana works in too much detail. Her files are hard to follow. I go by instinct. I slid the Slack thread across the table without saying a word. There it was, in full color and time-stamped. Nathan typing, "Lol, Dana's docs are too extra, I trust the flow," with a sunglasses emoji. Right underneath, Marlene had replied, "Let the boy learn." I did not have to say a thing. Their own words had already done the talking. HR's eyes bounced between me and the screen, one of them muttering under their breath, "Wow." I sat straight, hands in my lap, expression calm. I had nothing to hide. Procurement logs do not lie, neither do email approvals, Slack threads, or the warehouse ops timestamp showing that Nathan had signed off on the order twice. What struck me was not just the negligence, it was the audacity. They had ignored every flag, every red line, every suggestion, and still thought they could turn the story on me. But screenshots are louder than excuses. By noon, Finance sent out a risk summary that included a loss projection for the Corvault account with words like potential withdrawal and vendor reevaluation in bold. Someone from executive operations, I think her name was Jules, called me privately and said, "Dana, the board is asking for all documentation on this, not just procurement logs, any leadership behavior concerns too." I knew exactly what she meant. I forwarded everything. The folder I had kept since Nathan's first week was titled Vibes Only. It was full. Meanwhile, Nathan paced the corridor like someone waiting for a last-minute miracle. Marlene was locked in her office, curtains drawn, not even answering internal chat. Rumors flew fast. One said the CEO had called in from Brussels, demanding to know why his nephew's face was trending on the company's internal meme channel, where someone had photoshopped him holding a lava lamp with the caption, "Strategic Flow." I did not engage. I just watched. I watched the system that had dismissed me unravel on its own weight. Nathan was still talking circles in his second HR review, something about creative autonomy. Marlene tried to claim oversight fatigue, which I had never heard used outside of aviation disasters, but none of it stuck. Not when my documentation was that clean, that direct, and that backed up by timelines and digital trails. The best part? I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to fight dirty. I had played it straight. I had done the work. I had trusted the logs. And when the fallout came, as it always does when ego gets too loud, I was already miles ahead of it. They had wanted me quiet. They had wanted me to let them take the credit, then shoulder the mess. But I had receipts, and when the dust settled, quite literally this time, the story they tried to spin came undone with a single click. Nathan was quietly let go the following Monday. No farewell email, no donut box at the front desk. Just a silent update in the org chart and his Slack status frozen on offline. Marlene's departure took a bit longer, wrapped in corporate language like strategic realignment and sabbatical transition. By the end of the week, she had been moved to a vague innovation advisory role, which in Arcovector terms meant, "You embarrass the board, but we will keep you on payroll so the headlines stay soft." She never looked me in the eye again, and frankly, I preferred it that way. I received a formal apology from our executive leadership 2 days after the final review. It came in a letter signed by our COO, stamped with a gold seal like I had just won a spelling bee, and included phrases like regretful oversight, unacknowledged diligence, and failure to provide equitable recognition. It was the most beautifully corporate non-apology I had ever read, but the part that mattered came in numbers. A $40,000 performance bonus hit my account the next morning. No strings, no NDA, just a single-line email from finance that said, "Disbursement complete. Thank you for your continued excellence." That same afternoon, I got a calendar invite for a next step growth track conversation with HR and the VP of Strategy. I declined, not out of anger, but because I already knew where I was heading. The minute the lava incident went viral across our internal channels, I started planning my exit. I booked a one-way flight to Big Island, Hawaii, packed my bags, and handed in my resignation with a 2-line email that ended with, "Please forward all future correspondence to a coconut grove." Before I left, I got one last gift from Archivector, a glowing recommendation letter co-signed by both the COO and VP of Strategy. It was filled with praise, like resilient under pressure, detail-driven leadership, and my favorite, able to guide others with quiet strength. Ironically, those were the same qualities they had overlooked when I closed the CoreVault deal. But now that the lava dust had cleared, they finally saw it. A little too late, but I accepted it with grace. Sometimes the best revenge is when they have to publicly pretend they always respected you. The truth is, I never set out to destroy anyone. I just stopped shielding them from themselves. I let Nathan walk into the storm he created, and I let Marlene defend a structure built on sand. I documented, I tracked, I stayed polite. I smiled in meetings and answered every vibes-only decision with a paper trail. When it all fell apart, I did not need to lift a finger. They tripped over their own lava rocks. I just made sure the spotlight hit them as they stumbled. Now I spend my mornings sipping Kona coffee on the lanai, watching the ocean breathe. I consult when I feel like it. I take calls from companies that have actually read my resume. And not once have I been asked to train a nepotism case with a skateboard and zero experience. Funny how that works. I left behind the noise, the chaos, the performative management, and I found something better. Peace, perspective, a clear view of the horizon. Sometimes revenge is not loud. It is not rage or payback or some grand confrontation. Sometimes it is simply surviving with your dignity intact, stepping aside while arrogance burns itself down, and walking away before the smoke ever touches your clothes. That was my story, and that was my elevation.